Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mindy Johnson, and we're so grateful you're here today for our next primary sources and an incredible conversation ahead. To get us started, I want to place us in a little bit of a mindset of we're going to do things a little differently today. And we have a unique opportunity ahead of us. But to understand what we'll be discussing today, I want to give a little bit of a backstory on the role that animation has played with making social commentary, and indeed from the very beginning, going back as early as 1918 when Winsor McCay created his Sinking of the Lusitania, really as an effort to take a stand on events which sparked then the beginning of World War I. Moving into the 1960s, Les Goldman and Paul Julian's Hangman really spoke out about the dangers of standing by while others commit social injustice. And more recently, in 2019, Valerie Barnhart's Haunting the Girl in the Hallway, really casting light on the tragedy of passive indifference. Animation really has an opportunity to speak volumes and to create commentary, serving to illustrate a point, prompting a realization, or exemplifying the case of something unfortunate, recording facts or events. And we really have an incredible forum within the world of art, and specifically today, our conversation around animation. Once in a while, a remarkable and timely film comes along which holds impact, and even rarer, a film created by a first-time filmmaker and first-time animator as part of, we're going to take a look at this incredible film first before we meet our filmmaker. This is part of the New York Times OpDoc program, and it's a short film. So with that, let's run before we meet our filmmaker, Laurence Ralph. Let's view his remarkable work and based on his award-winning book, The Torture Letters.
Letter 1. An open letter to the boy and girl with matching airbrush book bags on the corner of Lawndale Avenue and Cermak Road. I began to worry about police violence in Chicago back in the summer of 2004. That's when I saw you on your knees at the corner of South Lawndale Avenue and West Cermak Road. It's been more than a decade. I know you're much older now, and yet, when I see black and brown teenagers of today's Chicago, I always return to that scene. 4 police cars were parked along the curb. 6 officers patted you down. Your bags were both white, each with a different word airbrushed in graffiti letters. Your names, I assumed, though I couldn't make them out from where I stood. I had moved to Chicago 2 weeks prior to this incident, and it scared me for 2 reasons. I was worried that this was something that I too might face. At the same time, I was reliving a scene from my past. When I was around the same age as you were then, I found myself in a similar position. My 2 older brothers and I had just moved from Baltimore to Columbia, Maryland. We decided to go to the mall. Before long, we realized a plainclothes police officer was following us from store to store. He eventually ordered us to stop. He frisked both of my brothers, who were 15 and 16, against a rail on the 2nd floor. The cop took my eldest brother, Wale, through one of those doors that you never notice along the corridors of a mall until all of your senses are heightened and you notice everything. It would take 4 long hours for Wale to be released. When the police released you, I felt a similar kind of relief as I felt then. But I also felt a familiar combination of anger, frustration, and yes, fear. I cannot change the anger and frustration and fear you must have felt. All I can say is that if I could press rewind and go back to the moment that you too were released, this time I would say a few words to you. It was not your fault that you were stopped by the police. I know they probably suggested it was, but those accusations are just a way of concealing the open secret. The open secret is this: the kind of police harassment you faced has grown into torture and has even resulted in death, all because police violence is rooted in fear. Letter 2. Another open letter to the boy and girl with matching airbrush book bags on the corner of Lawndale Avenue and Cermak Road. It's been so long since I saw you detained on that corner in Chicago. Even though I still don't have all the answers, and I still don't know how to solve this scourge, I have, at least, done something. I've done, as an academic, the thing I know how to do best: research and study and write. So I started a research project about the history of police violence in Chicago. For this project, I've interviewed Black youth in Chicago and talked about their experiences with the police. Their stories would probably sound familiar to you, given that they are your younger brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, friends, and in a way, your younger selves. During one of our conversations, for instance, Nakia explained to a group of teenagers that when her brother was around 15, the same age she was then, he got arrested.
My mom was there, so of course she was trying to calm me down, but she was distracted because I have older siblings.
Nakia's brothers and sisters were angry and getting more and more agitated, which put pressure on Nakia's mother to make sure no one else went to jail.
I definitely didn't understand what was happening. There was a lot going on, and I was just like, where is he going?
When Nakia finished sharing her story, Philip spoke.
My first memory of the police is from when I was 13, and there was a shooting on the block.
Philip had been walking in a large group with his brothers and cousins, 8 of them in all. An unmarked police car braked right in front of them, and an officer jumped out and told everyone to put their hands above their heads.
He started groping us in our private parts to look for guns and stuff. I was 13. What would I be doing with a gun?
Like Philip, what happened to you on Lawndale and Cermak is probably something you've worked hard to move beyond. But I vowed to make sure that your experience will impact a younger generation of Chicagoans who are searching for a way to process their feelings about the police. I cannot change that day, and I cannot change the pain and frustration and confusion you must have felt walking home with your heads hung low. I hope that if you could read this letter, you would feel the pain of that day, the burdens of that mistreatment, growing into something else. A greater sense of purpose, perhaps? When I think about that, I can't help but smile. Letter 3. An open letter to the late Dominique Damo Franklin. I didn't know you while you were living, but I do know you in death. You died at 23 and were much loved by your friends and family. But as a teenager and as a young adult, you experienced run-ins with the Chicago police that instilled in you a healthy fear of the cops, a fear familiar to many African-American youth. I also know that on May 7th, 2014, you allegedly stole a bottle of liquor from a convenience store. And when the police showed up, you ran. The officers chased and then caught you. Once they handcuffed you, they used a taser on you 2 different times. The second time, you fell and hit your head, lapsing into a coma from which you never awoke. When I think about the circumstances of your death, I can't help but remember the first man to expose police torture in Chicago, Andrew Wilson. His life and your death lead us to question, what kinds of police violence are we willing to accept? The police electrocuted Andrew with a mysterious device called the Black Box. A police commander, John Burge, supposedly engineered that box for the sole purpose of inflicting pain. The city of Chicago has now apologized to more than 100 black men who were tortured in this way. What Burge did to them and to Andrew Wilson is now considered unacceptable, unlike what the Chicago police did to you. The police electrocuted you with the weapon we've all become familiar with. The Taser Company engineered the device for the purpose of incapacitating people who were deemed dangerous. The police tased you just past midnight because of your alleged actions, but the city of Chicago has never apologized to you. When it comes to you, our government believes that the police acted within the scope of the law, and therefore, what those officers did to you, how they killed you, has been deemed reasonable. I want to tell you that a growing number of Americans disagree. From the taser to the black box, police violence exists on a continuum, and the violence on that continuum has one thing in common. It represents the ways our country injures and kills its most vulnerable groups. And we must change our country's tendency to systematically kill and deliberately control people in honor of you, Demo. Letter 4. An open letter to the late Andrew Wilson. You passed away on November 19th, 2007, while serving out your life sentence in Maynard Correctional Center. But in Chicago, your memory is very much alive. I don't know where your soul or your spirit resides, but in this world, your name will forever be linked to that of John Burge, given that you filed the civil suit that marked the beginning of the end of his reign of torture. I'm writing because I want you to understand the magnitude of the evil you helped thwart, though at great personal cost to yourself. I thought about your sacrifice recently when I reread the famous letter that Martin Luther King Jr. wrote to his fellow clergy from a jail cell in Birmingham, Alabama. It was quoted in a court ruling that described the scene of a black boy's torture. In 1991, that boy, Marcus Wiggins, then 13, was brought into Burge's precinct for questioning about a murder. A few hours later, Wiggins was electrocuted with a torture device. Several years later, he sued Burge and the city of Chicago. After the trial, the police wanted evidence related to the Wiggins case kept confidential. Judge Ruben Castillo disagreed. He ordered the public release of numerous disciplinary files containing allegations of torture. His rationale was that the files must be exposed to the light of human conscience. In making his case, Judge Castillo referenced King's letter.
Like a boil that can never be cured, so long as it is covered up, but must be open with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light, injustice must be exposed with all the tension its exposure creates to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured.
I could not agree more with King's sentiment or with Castillo's application of it. And yet, comparing the torture of a 13-year-old to a boil doesn't do justice to the suffering that people like Wiggins experienced. A boil can be cured relatively easily, but the scars left by torture can last a lifetime. Because torture is so deeply rooted in the culture of the Chicago police force, I think that we require another, more apt metaphor. Police torture is more like a tree, a hideous and disfigured tree, a tree that blooms death rather than life, a tree that casts a long and dark shadow. You helped me see that our country bears responsibility for the torture tree, Andrew, and that our country's investment in fear is what has allowed the torture tree to grow.
I'm sure you will agree with me. That is powerful, and you see what brings us to where we are here together, gathered. And I am deeply honored to be able to spend some time here in the course of our discussions on this incredible film and the story that brought it together. Both Laurence's work, The Torture Letters and Renegade Dreams, living through injury in the gangland Chicago, both really incredible volumes, but taking those stories and expanding beyond them. Dr. Laurence Ralph has his PhD in anthropology and is currently a professor of anthropology at Princeton University. He's a director of the Center on Transnational Policing at Princeton and previously taught at Harvard, is the author of the 2 books and also the filmmaker behind The Torture Letters, exploring the history of police torture and the ramifications of police torture today, really providing a powerful framework in approaching policing and justice in America. And joining us also, we are so fortunate to have Brenda Gilbert, co-founder and president of Bron Worldwide Media Group, an entertainment company committed to furthering the art and craft of meaningful commercial storytelling, and a company built on inclusion, innovation, and respect, with a stellar roster of Academy Award-winning and acclaimed films. So it is my great joy to be welcoming these 2 remarkable forces in our world. So if we can undo their cameras, get them on. There you are. Thank you, Laurence, and thank you, Brenda. It's so great to have you guys here. Well, I'm deeply honored. It was Jinko Gota and Brenda who were a big part of introducing your work, Laurence, to us here at CTN, but also in a wider way through a lot of the various festivals you've been screening at. It's a powerful film, and I think everybody sort of, the way you've beautifully laid it out, comes to it from different perspectives, which is the beauty of storytelling and filmmaking. An anthropologist and an academic, tell us about, first of all, the core of your writing and research, but then what brought you to animation?
Thank you so much. And just it's a pleasure to be here and, sharing my film with you and having this discussion. So I thank you for that. I think as an academic, I always wanted to be a storyteller as well as an academic. And one of the probably frustrating things for me throughout my academic career is that you realize that there's a disjuncture between your audience and who you want to reach and your research findings oftentimes and what you're learning. And so I've always thought about ways to kind of bridge that gap. And, I began bridging it just through community involvement and talking about my research in different communities. But, I had a sense that that wasn't enough. And so over time, I've been trying to tell stories in different ways. And that's really how I came to animation. I came to it specifically because when I was researching Chicago and the torture scandal, which is really implicated in the activist movement to kind of gain recognition for what happened to these men over decades. And part of that was that the torture survivors really advocated for a reparations ordinance in which they petitioned the city so that the history of the police torture scandal would be taught in Chicago public schools at the 8th grade and 10th grade level. And so when I've learned about that as an educator, that really stood out in my mind. And I just wanted to make something to be a part of that. And I knew, as accessible as I wanted to write, it wasn't that accessible that it could reach, middle school and high school students. And that's where I started, being drawn to animation and thinking about what are the different ways that I could tell this story. And I began researching different kinds of animation. And I decided ultimately to make an animated film.
Oh, wow. I love it. What a great journey. Brenda, what was it? Tell us how you were introduced to Lawrence's work, and what was it that spoke to you about?
Absolutely. So first of all, every time I watch this animated short, I get a bit emotional. So if you hear a crack in my voice, it's because of the impact. But Jinko Goto and I were on a panel, an animated shorts panel for judging all these submissions that had come into the Spark Animation Festival that's in Vancouver. And we probably watched about 52 shorts or so. And Lawrence's really stood out just in terms of impact. And asking him, why did you use this medium in terms of getting this type of content out there? And he said to me that it was to get visibility. It's another medium of engagement. And what's also important to note is that keeping that impact without diminishing the meaning is very, very important. Also, as we as content creators look at our audiences. Who is listening? Who does the emotionality resonate with? And when you use animation, it can be clever in the sense that you can educate, inform young people as well, so that it is a bit more digestible in terms of them understanding, but also just in terms of individuals as a whole, particularly in a COVID world where people are very emotional and really tired and things like that. They feel fatigued. This is a way of actually getting messaging out there that is on a continuum. So I know that Lawrence had mentioned, violence being on a continuum, but animation can also be on a continuum just in terms of getting this out there and having conversations well beyond the screen or wherever you consume content.
Absolutely. And I think that's the beauty of your work. Again, as a first-time filmmaker stepping into this forum, I think you've beautifully captured the process and the elements that animation, the forum of animation can showcase. Talk a little bit. Let's explore a little bit about the process. Now, you created this book, really remarkable book that was on its own breaking ground and impacting others and through one avenue. But as you said, you had done some research into animation and purposefully wanted to reach a different age level. What were the next steps for you? That's something I think even as artists who are steeped in this medium, we need to know or have a sense of what was the trail that got you started in that.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I would say that I probably wouldn't have gotten started in animation if it were not for the topic. And I was struggling to find a way to just write and think about torture itself. And I think that there's something about torture in which, like, when you're writing about it, it can be very sanitized and clinical if you're going, by the legal definitions and things like that, and it gets away from the experience of it. But also, it can be very sensationalized too when you think about torture, and when you describe it too heavily, you can become overwhelmed with it. And so I was really struggling with that balance. And there was something about doing the research where it was so emotional that I knew that my book wouldn't convey that. And so that's also how I got into animation and thinking through, just the emotional impact that animation has and can convey as a vehicle. And I was really thinking through that. And so the first thing I did was really started to research different styles of animation. And I was really drawn to 2D animation because of the abstract nature of it. I wanted something that wasn't so realist, because my first thought in filmmaking was to you maybe go the more documentary route and to have a kind of realist documentary. But I didn't want to turn people off with the subject matter of torture at the same time. And so I wanted something that can invite you in, and so that you can kind of experience the emotions of it, but not be overwhelmed by it. And so for me, the abstract nature of the animation was key, and the way that um, I could describe violence in a way that fractured at times, but morphed into something else and had a means of transformation.
I what's always stands out for me is the young voices that you've conveyed, and you I think you've sort of beautifully handled, as you said, a challenging subject, but you've also you speak about how it reverberates. It isn't just the immediate victim, but the family members and the witnesses and everyone else that torture impacts, and particularly at such young ages. It's a very real topic for a lot of our youth. And to your point, Brenda, talking about the accessibility of animation, was that ever present and in your choices that in making it, utilizing abstract animation and being able to sort of reach beyond um, immediate ages and making it much more accessible?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I always thought carefully about. I think, I think animation is both for a kind of, young kids. It's also for adults. I think the similarity between, the animation for kids and animation for adults is that there's something that connects us to our innocence, and there's something that connects us to maybe essential truths that we like forgot as we got older, and things about life that are important. And I wanted to remind all audiences of those things, of kind of the vulnerability of young people, and that they shouldn't have to live this way, right? And even if this particular experience of police violence is unfamiliar to you, what I wanted is to connect you with children who experience this, and have them, kind of have you walk in their shoes a little bit. And oftentimes when it comes to youth of color, we don't see them as youth. There's a way that they become adults before their time. And so I think animation kind of forces you to remember that these are kids, and they shouldn't have to live this way, but they are living this way. And what does it feel like for you to kind of walk a day in their shoes, and to realize that how would you feel if you have to navigate life in this way? And I think again, animation kind of helps me get there immediately, whereas kind of other mediums, or it's more difficult in terms of the movements that it takes the viewer to get there.
Yeah, oh, those are really great points. Um, eh, eh, Brenda, what is it about this style that had such big impact on you? But you were also there, as you said, as part of the Spark Animation Festival, where this did indeed win a wonderful award. What was the reaction? What was upon the initial viewing of this to the festival audiences?
The same thing, like, what can we do to help? How can we build a network, build a community that can, really propel people to make some progressive change. And that was really important for both Jinko and I. So we were like, the first meeting Jinko and I had said, this is something that we took on our own. It was our own initiative because we felt, okay, we have to do something. We don't know how we're going to go about doing it, but we know that you and I, like we're like-minded people. And so we try to reach out to people like Tina, like you, Mindy, as well, that really feel strongly about what can we do to help? What can we do to evoke change? What can we do also to be better communities, and also to look at not just the States, but look at it from a global perspective as well. Children should not be living in fear. Children should have fun. They should be creative. They should be putting art out there. They should be playing music. They should be being, they should be in the forest and things like that and really exploring. They should not think about the police and systemic discrimination and individuals within the police force as somebody that should be protecting them, but they look upon them as fear. And that's not something that we want our children to do. And so, in looking at this type of content and this art form is very compelling. Like Lawrence said, just in terms of being abstract, but it was just like, you watch it, you want to do something, there's a course of action. And we just said we're going to figure it out. So we rallied a lot of people, including festival organizers, including other organizations that we felt would give visibility to this particular film and the content. So it was just the compulsion that we got to do something, and we're going to make it happen full steam ahead.
Bravo. And let's talk a little bit about what the reaction has been. Obviously, winning a number of awards, but beyond that, what sort of personal impact are you seeing, and throughout audiences? Certainly, readers have come to your work through your book, but to your point, this really is reaching a very wider, different audience. What kinds of things are you seeing?
Well, fortunately and unfortunately, the film is very timely,
Yeah.
and it was a long time in the making, about a year in the making, but it actually came out this past summer, right on the heels of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor's death.
Mm.
And so it has really accelerated conversations in all ways, in ways that I couldn't even imagine when creating this film. I think being in activist spaces, I was hearing things like, defund the police, and these ways in which people were talking about reprioritizing um, you know, public safety in the US. But I never thought that that would be a kind of national and international conversation when I was making this film. And so I think it's been part of that conversation now, and it's been part of everything that's going on in terms of accountability for police violence and the kind of recognition of what's happening on a wider scale. And it's not unbelievable that this happened now. I think when I was making this film, I had a sense that people would think something like police torture was unbelievable, but people understand very well how it happens and that it can happen. And I think more people are motivated to kind of seek remedies now, and that's across the board in a way that I didn't imagine when first thinking about this film.
It's interesting, as creatives, we are kind of in our bubble sometimes, and the immediate world that we're absorbed in may not initially resonate, but it really is in the doing. We oftentimes find ourselves in the zeitgeist of the time and the moment, and once our work is created or in the process of creating. But that then gives your film a different purpose, a different role, a different avenue. Has it extended beyond what your initial thoughts were?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think what it's given it is a sense of urgency, in a sense that, as Brenda was saying, like something needs to happen now. We can't assume that change is going to come automatically, but we have to kind of mobilize all our resources. We have to kind of think together about ways in which we can change society for the better. Um, and I think, yeah, I don't think that I foresaw that sense of urgency immediately. I mean, I think it's something that I've been driven by, but I didn't think that viewers would recognize that and feel it in the same way. And I think that's been a pleasant surprise with the film, and it's been part of the film's journey, definitely.
Mm. You know, there's a where are we at? Let's go beyond the film to your view of where we are today with social change, particularly in the area of torture. Um, in some ways, it, this issue may seem insurmountable, but yet through tools and opportunities to express, such as your film, I think we can see a larger audience can come to understand the importance of this need for change. So where are we at with that today, and what are the next steps? This is, as you said, it's a continuum. um, what are the next steps?
I mean, I think where we're at, um, as a society, I think what's different, I would say, in this moment than even, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when Black Lives Matter first emerged. I think when Black Lives Matter first emerged, people didn't really understand it. People thought that, to say that Black Lives Matter meant that someone else's lives didn't matter, or, but I think that now there's an increasing awareness that our vulnerability is shared, and that if if someone is disproportionately vulnerable, that affects all of us. And I think that we see that, just in these horrific incidents of police violence, but I think we see it more broadly through something like the pandemic. And we realize that, like, literally we're connected to each other, and if somebody's vulnerable, that means that I can be vulnerable, and that I need to be worried about their vulnerability just as much as my own, maybe even more, but if I have more resources. And so I think, as a society, I think we're beginning to understand this. And I say that because of the diversity of the protest when it came to Black Lives Matter, and people organizing under this banner and realizing that it doesn't take away from other groups, but recognizing that if, you know Black people are getting killed by the police, then that means that we're all vulnerable to police violence in a way. And so I think this moment, I think, is a little bit different because of that shared sense, and then the idea that, you know it's not either or, but it's kind of both and we are in a kind of commitment together.
Let's. I agree. I think an interesting convergence of factors here, as you mentioned, the pandemic and the Breonna Taylor and George Floyd circumstances, and we are now in uh, going through the trial, and I think as a society learning a bit more. You talked a bit about the message of Black Lives Matter initially, and as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, as a writer, clarity is key, right? The research we do, the writing. Talk a bit about the importance of clarity and message and how you applied that to your film.
Yeah, I mean, the book and the film are structured around letters, and
Which I have to say is such a terrific foundation. What a great format and accessible approach to it. So maybe speak a bit about your choice in framing it in that context.
Yeah, sure. And so, I mean, just generally speaking, it's about clarity, but more uh, specifically, it was about, again, this problem with how do I write about torture? And when I was in these community settings and listening to the torture survivors speak about what they went through, I noticed and I realized that it never seemed voyeuristic, right? And at the time, I was trying to write about the same things, and I struggled with my writing because at times it did feel voyeuristic to me. The way that I was writing about it seemed sensational. I didn't know why, but I realized that it has to do with the audience, it has to do with intent, it has to do with why you're writing. And when the torture survivors were speaking in community settings, they were always speaking to particular groups for a particular reason. And they always had a very specific message that they wanted people to know. And so I ended up writing letters to kind of mimic that. I wanted to write to a particular person or a particular group of people, and I wanted to tell them something specific about torture. And when I kind of kept myself really regimented to that, to the purpose, to the intent, to the audience, and why they needed to know this, I got away from that sensationalism, and I got to connect with the people and the groups of people that I wanted to connect with. And then I found that the viewer or the reader, then they have to put themselves in that person's shoes, and they have to understand what life is like for them. And so I hope that it affects my reader and my viewer in a different way as well. And so letters really became important to me to kind of grapple with this question of writing about violence.
Yeah, no easy subject, that's for sure. But then to make it an to give your reader and viewers a much more open door to coming into this really traumatic world. Um, as a storyteller, I want to get your take on, as a visual artist, where can that message be? Where can they take their message to a, from their visual into a commentary, into a statement? As you were producing the film, what were some of the choices, the creative choices? I mean, obviously, the palette that you're working in with various gray and black and white palette, very limited palette, speaks volumes. Um, the abstract approach, the specific stories that you were telling within the context of this. Talk a bit about some of those choices, if there were um, any chances where you ended up with ooh, this is a little too much, or I need to not clear enough. Were there any instances through the course of production on this? You said it was about a year.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one thing I recognized while doing this process is that I do think very visually, and I think that helped in a lot of ways. It was more natural for me to think about what it would look like than to write it. And what I was primarily concerned about with the film is just conveying the emotions. It's hard to write about what it's like to talk to someone about torture, right?
Yeah.
And you know, you experience so much of that through the senses, through what you see, through what you hear, through through just being in the room. And so I wanted to kind of create an experience where the viewer is in that. And so a lot of the visuals are about being surrounded, being engulfed, being almost, you know, almost suffocated by the violence until you find a way out, and kind of searching for a way out of it. And there's this, almost like a cycle of being consumed by it, and then finding a pathway out. And that was what the research experience was for me, and that's what it was like listening to people talk about this. And it's just so you know, I worked with the great animator Josie Juritz, and we talked a lot about what we wanted to accomplish. And we drew a lot from Cubism, and Jacob Lawrence is one of my favorite artists. And so there's a kind of African American strand of Cubism that we wanted to get or reference. And so that's what we started with, that just the Cubism shapes and forms. And then we played with how to break them apart, how to come together, how to transform them at different spaces. And so there were certain key things that we wanted to represent visually that served as anchors for the story. But then a lot of it is transition, and how do we navigate ourselves through this violence.
How has this creative experience, through completely sort of shifting, you know, as a writer, write very visually as well, and so I love hearing you say that. But now, immersing yourself in a visual experience and a storytelling experience, how has that influenced or altered, maybe enhanced your writing, your view of your work? Has it expanded that? Has it focused it in certain ways, in certain areas, working in a different medium?
Yeah, I think it definitely has. I mean, you know, I can see different aspects of my work differently now, and I can identify what it is. And you know, I before this experience, I wasn't able to say like, okay, I have an idea and that's a short film, or you know, or I have an idea and that's a graphic novel, and or I have an idea and that's a book, you know. But I can do that now, and I can kind of identify what will work with different mediums now that I have this experience. And there's 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 so much of how we take in information that's you know, some of it's suited for books, some of it's more visual, a lot of it's sonic. You know, I think we, you know, and there's something about matching up what we want to convey with those different mediums and those different forms. And I think I'm able to do that a lot better now, and a lot of it's driven by audience. And so I know I want to address certain audiences. I know I want to address young people. I know I want to address, um, you know, school-aged children. And so I know now how I can reach them with different mediums.
Getting in and literally playing in the sandbox of that medium, and seeing what can be done, rather than sticking to one area. I think it's wonderful. That's what I love about this conversation and this experience. Brenda, as within your work in storytelling, um, very true. I mean, obviously, the projects that you're working on and the things that you create uh, work in better in different mediums. Talk a little bit about, as artists, what they should be doing, maybe to say, perhaps they have an idea, to explore what would be the best forum for it.
I think it's looking at, you know, tinkering not giving up on something, thinking about just in terms of format, would that be much more compelling or educating or entertaining on the narrative side of things? Would it be more interesting on the, documentary docuseries, sort of the non-scripted side of things? Or would animation be the best medium for, portraying certain stories, and looking sometimes in the characters themselves and where the focus is? We all know it starts with a story, and then we have to think about the execution. And there's also a mixed blend of the formats that we can use as well. We've seen that a lot on the various platforms and networks, just in terms of even documentaries that have spiked in interest, particularly during the pandemic. And they use a blend of both animation and a non-scripted format because they feel that it can really accentuate the story. It can really make it much more interesting. It can really do a deep dive just in terms of the issues maybe, or certain components of what is trying to be conveyed. It also can really propel in terms of the story itself, like in terms of the narration. So I think it all depends on, looking at the story, what you're trying to say, who the audience is, what do you think is the best sort of representation on screen, and where do you think it would garner the most interest?
Those are all really great points, and we're at an exciting time as creatives too, because of the just this wide open world of avenues where stories, experiences, commentary can be taken. Where has the film been taking you to? There's a lot of festivals, of course. You mentioned initially your intent was the classroom. What has the response been there?
Yeah, it's been great in the classroom. I think there's been a lot of talk about just experiences that uh, youth, particularly youth of color, uh, have have uh, have experienced when it comes to the police. And it's been a way for them to talk about research. It's been a way for them to talk about current events. It's been a way for them to talk about what they might create. And it's been a way for me to talk about my own experiences, because when I was actually doing this research, uh, I was I was asking youth of color about their first experience with the police, the first encounter they can remember. And before they would answer the question, they turned it to me and said, "No, what's the first experience you remember?" And so they wouldn't really engage unless they knew where I stood on the issue.
Yeah.
And so that's why I start the film with one of my earlier experiences, because that was almost the precondition for doing the research and doing the film itself. And so a lot of the conversations are like that. They're about experiences. They're about uh, the way that your life is affected and impacted by police violence, and even if it doesn't happen to you, how it happens to people that you know in your community, and what that has meant for your life. And so those have been really meaningful discussions.
I think that's the impact, as you said, that people are eager to have these discussions, to share their stories, but they want to know, where you're coming from. And that's, I think, one of the most powerful draw-ins to the film is your own personal experience. What stands out for me is just how observant and visceral it becomes through the animation, but also in your narrative, your voiceover. Just even calling out, those hidden doorways that you never see in a shopping mall until you do, and suddenly it's this portal of torture, and in a way, in a very different experience than what you would think. And I think that's what's so powerful about this is it opens up a space where the audience realizes, wait, he can identify with us, and knows whereof he's speaking, and we're not being talked down to, but we're allowed to open and share. Is the film being utilized in workshops and um, part of curriculum that you know of within classrooms, or it's still early yet, but I can see where this would make a terrific.
Yeah, it's still early, but it has been used in several courses already, both in college and high school level. So there is a lot of discussion. It is a kind of starting off point for discussing some of these issues, and also how to process what's going on, with something like the George Floyd trial, because we've kind of seen these images over and over again, and for as long as we can remember as an adult, right? And these kind of uh, videos kind of crop up to the point where we're almost fatigued by them. But this project has reminded me that for someone, it's their first time seeing that video, and for that person who it's their first time seeing something like that, what do they do with that? How do they process that? And so I think this film is part of that processing.
Opening the door and getting them on the journey of process. Absolutely.
Right.
That's powerful. And I think that's where, as artists, that's our role, is to really break open and get people to think and see and observe and experience in a very different way. I want to open it up for some questions here. I know, Matt, I think we've got a few that have been coming in.
Yeah, our first question here is from Madeline, who's asking Lawrence, will you be returning to animation for future projects as a medium for storytelling?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Yeah, I'll definitely be returning to animation. I think I'm interested in youth of color and how they experience violence. And that's both as perpetrators of violence and victims of violence. And when I'm talking about victims of violence, I'm also talking about the systems like mass incarceration and juvenile justice and how they grapple with that. And as I was saying earlier, one of the biggest issues is that once someone is seen as guilty, then it's hard for society to see them as a child and to see that they're still developing as a person, and that the one mistake they made shouldn't define who they are for the end of time. And I think that's been a theme in all of my work so far. And it is definitely a theme going forward. So I want to use animation, particularly in telling stories about juvenile justice, to kind of think and help viewers remember that these are children, and help them, in a way, I think it's more realistic. And when it comes to seeing them, than sometimes the realist live action, because those are so clouded with our stereotypes and our judgments about who we already presume these children to be.
You tapped into a very important and powerful area there. I've done work in prison programs working with youth, and it really is important to see them. They really are children, and it is exactly that one choice that sadly is defining them, and the system is not supporting. System both inside and outside incarceration just doesn't seem to support certain groups that can so easily be guided and misguided. So I think it's a matter of getting to them. We will continue this conversation, I'm sure. What else, Matt? I know we've got a few more questions there. I want to make sure we get to them.
This next question is asking, did you feel making this film was a risk for you? And if so, why?
Yeah, I mean, I think it almost seems as a bigger risk now than it did when I was first making it. When I first made it, I didn't I didn't think it would be seen as widely. I didn't think it would be taken up by the New York Times. I didn't think it would be in film festival circuits. I was just making a kind of visual representation of some of my research. And I knew the research was risky because I was telling a story of a scandal, and there was a lot of work to keep torture under wraps in Chicago. And so uh, for decades, people didn't want to acknowledge it. And so I knew that history was controversial. Um, but I kind of associated the risk that is with the project overall and not necessarily the medium of film. And in retrospect, I think it was risky because kind of putting it in this medium means that a lot more people would see it and it would carry it further. And I don't know how I would feel now if I had set out originally to kind of have this broad impact. Uh, but I do understand that now as a risk going forward with my various projects, but I think it's a risk that I'm willing to take because these issues are so important and they need more light shed on them, and they need uh, we need to have these conversations as a society. So, even if there's going to be backlash, given how fraught our society is, but I do think it's a risk worth taking.
Thank you for speaking to that. I think as artists, we do need to be reminded once in a while of the importance of risk taking and stepping into the unknown, and then recognizing you never know where it will take you, the doors and opportunities and avenues it brings you down, bringing us together here even. Brenda, can you talk just a little bit about the importance of that and what as artists we can do?
Absolutely. So I remember when I was younger, I used to always think that risk was a negativity. It was always something that would challenge me in a way that I didn't want to be challenged. And now, just in terms of some of the content that we produce across the Bron group of companies, I think of risk as an opportunity. I think of it as, getting information out there. We were told when we had produced, fully financed The Birth of a Nation, that it was a risk, and why are we doing this? Time and time and time again. The same thing with Fences, the same thing with Roman J. Israel, the same thing with Judas and the Black Messiah. And you're like, because it needs to get out there. We need to, like I intimated earlier, is have these types of conversations. We need to inform, we need to educate. So I think as, to artists is, finding what you feel comfortable, looking at your positive attributes in terms of creativity, and then putting that content out there that is very meaningful to you. And don't worry if you don't sort of figure it out the first time. I've been knocked down many times over again and have gotten back up, faltered a few times, but also found people that would really support me, encourage me, and also collaborate with me. And look at how we are here today. We come from different experiences. We come together, from different countries as well. I'm from Canada. And look at how we've come together, built a community, and really are supportive of each other as artists. As people, as decent human beings that are really wanting to put good out in the world.
Absolutely. Bravo. Lawrence, what learnings, lessons, observations, insights that you've garnered from this experience on this film will you take into the next film, the next project, the next book, the next area of research?
Yeah, I mean, I think I think I would just echo a lot of what Brenda just said, but I think for me, it also boils down to staying true to what my purpose is and what my strengths are as a storyteller, and not being confined to particular boxes. I think if I was, I'm reminded that a risk is as an academic to venture out and kind of pursue this pursue filmmaking, and um, there's not an obvious reason why I would do that, and probably a lot of my colleagues would tell me it's a waste of time, but there's something, if I'm true to my research and I'm true to what I'm trying to convey, I recognized right away that there were limitations to my approach as an academic. And, I think I was honest with that, and I looked for ways to to reconcile that, and to do justice to my research and to justice to the people that I was talking to who were sharing their experiences, sharing their lives with me. And so I think that's one key lesson that I'll take, and is that, it's almost a leap of faith that I'll find a way to convey this, and that I'll find support, and I didn't know where that support was going to come from. I didn't know how I was going to find the resources to get the film done. But I knew that it needed to get done. And if I could just, could do piece by piece, maybe people will join me in this journey. And that's what happened. And so I think that that's a part of it that Brenda was speaking to. When we create something as artists, then it's almost like a leap of faith that people will also support you, that you'll find like-minded people. And so that's definitely something I carry forward.
The unseen hands that come forward, and finding community and a space for it. I think that's the essence really of creativity. When something is born through creativity, then there's a void filled that perhaps we didn't know there was, but it's now filled, and that's the importance of what we do. Matt, a couple more questions.
Yeah, our next question is asking, will you be telling any more human stories like this? What's next for you?
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely telling a story about the juvenile justice system, and about a young man whose life was cut short after he had a stint in the juvenile justice system. And what I want to kind of convey through that is that we think about these institutions as like mass incarcerations, jail, juvenile detention centers, as institutions that are going to rehabilitate people, but oftentimes it puts them in a position that they can't ever get their life back on track. And there's very concrete reasons that it does that, because it takes them away from family, takes them away from support, takes them away from schools. It makes it harder for them to get jobs. And so I want to tell that story, and how, even a seemingly short time in juvenile justice, or in a juvenile detention center, can irrevocably change someone's life. And that's the next story I'll be telling.
And any mediums in particular? Animation?
Yeah, definitely animation. I want to create a short film in animation, and it's also going to be a book-length project.
Wonderful. Can't wait for that. Matt, next question.
Yeah, it's funny. Our next question here is asking if there are other mediums you'd like to explore. For example, live theater.
It's a great question. I haven't thought about live theater yet. I am working on a graphic novel at the moment that, and that's another way. I think it lends itself to things that I'm interested in telling stories visually. And so this graphic novel is about it's about how we think about public safety, and different ways that we might think about it. And it kind of it's very historical. It goes into the roots of policing in the US, and kind of takes us to where we are now with kind of rethinking, hopefully, public safety.
I think that's one thing that resonates with me so much is your use of history. I see that as a, when we look back at where we've come from, we have a better light to cast ahead. And that speaks volumes to me. Talk about the importance of drawing historical basis for your work, and is it conveying the evolution of change or not? Is it the sort of adding to the look at the systemic problem we've had and how we must change this? Where does history serve you as a tool in getting your message out?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of what I'm writing against oftentimes is this idea of exceptionalism, that this time is different from any other time in human history. And I want to remind uh, the audience that, in many ways we've been here before, and there's a reason why our society looks the way it does now. And history is so crucial to that. I think fundamentally, um, history is so important to talk about when we talk about race, particularly because, like, if we look at society and we see all these disproportionate outcomes, and we see, so many African Americans in prison, for example, or not in higher education, or not in, Fortune 500 companies and things like this. Um, how do we explain that if it without history? I think it kind of denaturalizes the way that society is right now. And so I think we need a firmer grounding to understand why it is this way, but also how we can change.
Yeah, I think contextualizing is so key in that regard. And but to your point, it really is about where we've come from, but why we can change, why we need to change, what we have to change from moving forward. Talk a bit about, with your projects that you have ahead. Uh, are you talk a bit about this point of change? I know we talked earlier about where we are and where you see things headed, but um, some of the key steps as individuals, what can be taken to proceed towards change, just in our own small way. It seems like such a big epic thing, but what can we as individuals do to help initiate this change in our own lives?
Yeah, I mean, I think one big thing when it comes to policing, unfortunately, I think right now we've seen that the police don't serve everyone equally. And I think the part of the reckoning that we're having now is a kind of realization that, you know, a lot of people in our society, every time they've called the police, they've come to help them, and they don't see that, you know, it is some people can perceive danger when they encounter the police. And so I think you know, one thing that we can all do is kind of think about the role that the police plays in our lives, and also recognize that that role has been different for different people. And I think that has implications for what we are perceiving. And someone called the police on George Floyd for a $20 bill, and I don't know what that person thought they were accomplishing, but I'm sure they didn't think that it was going to result in his death, you know? And so I think we need to think about how those things can affect other people. I think we need to think about who we are afraid of and why. You know, and I think we need to think about how we can, you know, have public safety without the threat of violence or you know. And so I think these are things that we can think about in our own communities. We can think about in our neighborhoods. We can think about in our schools. And when we feel like we're scared of something, we need to really think about, why do we think we're scared? What are we scared of actually? And is it someone who just looks different from us in our neighborhood, or is it what is the source of that fear? And then how do we remedy that fear, you know, in ways that may not uh, be as convenient as calling the police, but may be more important ultimately.
And we as artists, in whatever forum we are working in, uh, can use our talents and use our efforts to help others ask us questions and bridge those gaps and come to understand as well. Matt, I know we've got a short amount of time here, but I want to ensure that we get any of our questions asked and answered.
Yeah, our final question here is do you have any thoughts on how we can use art to help break down barriers working towards equality?
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking of history, you know, art has always been essential to breaking down barriers and working towards equality. I think that, you know, those are the things that people remember. Those are the things that travel kind of beyond our communities. Those are the things that can really impact us on an emotional level. And again, when a large part of why I'm drawn to animation is because of the way that it can kind of spark empathy, and it can spark a kind of feeling that, oh, I know I may not have had that exact experience, but I know what that must be like. I've been scared before. You know, I've seen when someone hurt before. You know, I've wished I could help before. I know what that's like. And I think there's something about art that can really spark that empathetic impulse that we have inside of us, right? And that is a powerful a seed for change once we can spark that. And so, you know, as artists, I think that, you know, we can work towards creating things that kind of get that empathetic impulse out, and that can reach across and bridge divides. And I think that that is a very powerful catalyst for change.
Absolutely. Brenda, your thoughts on that same question?
I totally agree with Lawrence, just in terms of a catalyst for change. You know, we also look at things that have a better representation on screen. You and I, Mindy, have talked in past, if you can see it, you can be it. And if we have also positive imagery for change, I think it's very, very important too, regardless of race, religion, creed, gender, you know, non-binary, etc. And you know, as artists, we also have to adapt, and we have to pivot dependent upon the times in terms of how are we putting content out there. And it's just really, really important, again, to just emphasize even the representation behind the screen as artists, whatever art form that you're working on, whether that's drawing, you know, you could be a modeler, you could be a render wrangler, you could be a production assistant. Everyone has, I believe, a creative outlet of some sort. It's just, how do we use our skills and how can we evoke change in a positive way?
Great and powerful questions. And to your point, Lawrence, of, you know, often in the classroom and in examining film and why we look at film, why it stays with us, is that correlation of the visual with emotion. And once we are tapped with our emotions, we retain it. It stays with us longer, resonates with us longer, and in ways far beyond the written page, and far beyond just a documentation of something. but when we encapsulate and correlate emotion to it, it stays with us and has lasting impact. And I can draw that directly to our time here. I am deeply impacted because of the great level of emotion shared by each of you in the work that you do and continue to do. I can't wait to see what is next. It is a great pleasure and great honor to spend time with you and have an incredible observational conversation about your experiences. So we are grateful here. Thank you for your time. And for all of you, please, in the chat, you'll see further information. This conversation will be available online shortly following. And please also contact information, websites where you can view the film again, share it with others, and reach out to Laurence and his really powerful and important ongoing work. We hope it's inspired you to take your artistry to a new level and find places where you too can be socially commenting to help improve and better our world. We as artists, that's a vital role. Brenda, thank you for the valuable work you do with Bron, and we continue to watch, and congratulations on the many great, well-deserved awards coming in for your work, for both of you. And please keep tuned to Primary Sources. We'll be back in a couple of weeks with more further essential conversations for the creatives. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.